So the next major, as I was saying, the next major breakthrough for me was in 2005. Two things happened. One is Michael Creighton, a very zealous, in a very good sense, man from New Mexico, said you got to focus on the ordinary and universal magisterium, and I didn't really know this. So he pointed out in Vatican I that I had not noticed before. Vatican I infallibly defined the church has two auspices or aspects under which she can act infallibly. One is the extraordinary magisterium, when the Pope ex cathedra makes a doctrinal ruling that all Catholics must believe. Those are the elements. He can do it alone or he can do it in council, general council. These would be solemn definitions. In the council they would usually say, let them be anathema. If they don't believe this, let him be anathema. That was used at the Council of Trent, many of the council. Was not used at Vatican II. We'll get back to that in a minute. So an example would be like when Pope Pius IX in 1854 made the ruling that the Blessed Mother Mary was immaculately conceived. She was conceived without sin. Mary conceived without sin. Let us have recourse to thee, and so forth. That had been in dispute. Now in the Bible it does say, Mary, Hail Mary, full of grace. Now that, I don't think that's said about anybody else in the Bible. That's not Christ. Full of grace. So there's hint, and there was always a tradition and part of the church that Mary was immaculately conceived. But St. Thomas Aquinas and others said no. Now in 1846, there was a vision at Lourdes, which was ruled to be a true vision. And I believe the seer's name was Subaru, Bernadette Subaru, I believe. And one of the things she did early in the first vision, when people came with her, the Blessed Mother told her to eat grass, and she started eating grass out of the ground, and people said, well, this has got to be from the devil. There was a reason for that, because where she ate is where the Lord's spring came up. But anyway, she said to Bernadette, who was like an illiterate peasant girl, often that's who God appears to, because they don't have any pride like those of us who think we're educated. And Our Lady said to her, I am the Immaculate Conception. And this got to Pope Pius IX, who came to office in 1846. He was elected Pope in 1846. And the theologians were stunned. They said, how did this peasant, illiterate girl even know that phrase? And that's one of the reasons they started investigating it. Found it was a true vision. So Pius XII in 1854 settled a 1,000-year dispute among the theologians. He said, Mary was immaculate conceived. He proclaimed the doctrine of the Immaculate Conception. And the reason for that, though, logically, is that if Christ is God and he is without sin, the Father is the God, the Holy Ghost overcame the Blessed Mother when she agreed to have the Savior. So the Holy Ghost was pure and his mother Mary was pure, so that Christ, you might say, in spiritual DNA, if I can abuse concepts here, was pure from mother and father's side. Okay. Now that's the church's extraordinary magisterium. Everybody knows about that. That's a Catholic. Ex cathedra, meaning from the chair of Peter. Pope defines something that we all must believe. Those are the elements. It makes it known he's doing that. But there's another aspect of the church's infallibility that I was not aware of, kind of maybe subconsciously way back when not really. That's the ordinary and universal magisterium. That covers the Mass, the sacraments, canonizations, canon law, even prayers and catechisms promulgated by the Pope. The Pope cannot lead the faithful into error when he promulgates something for everybody. And the Mass and so forth, sacraments, canon law is for everybody. So that's the other aspect of extraordinary magisterium. And this is where the smoking gun is. And this is what Michael Creighton pointed out to me. That what the Vatican II popes have done by falsifying Christ's language, what he said at the Last Supper at the consecration, falsifying, not just a mistranslation. By Paul VI purporting to be a pope and signing error and false moral teaching in the documents of Vatican II, when by definition, at a general council, he's acting from the chair of Peter for the whole church. That's by definition in general council. These are things a pope cannot do. Vatican II does not violate the church's extraordinary magisterium. it violates the ordinary and universal magisterium, which is when the Pope, especially in harmony with all the world's bishops, promulgates something touching on faith and morals for the Church. Vatican II touched on faith and morals. Now, if you want to look into that further, look up articles by John Daly, who's a layman in France, called The Impossible Crisis, and also Did Vatican II Teach Infallibly? You could also look up a book that I compiled from Papal and Council Ones called The Conciliar Church, meaning Vatican Council. The Conciliar Church cannot be the true church, and the new Mass cannot be the true Mass. You can look up that. Maybe just search the new Mass cannot be the true Mass, and that should come up. Okay, so that was the final smoking gun. I also heard a convert to Catholicism, a brilliant man named Jerry Matitix, give a talk in the same year, right before Michael Creighton focused me on this. And he showed how Paul VI, when it came to consecrating bishops, completely changed the formula for consecrating bishops. That moved Jerry Matitix from being a kind of, are they popes or not, into being a Sedevacantist, or believing that these Vatican II popes are not popes, because the form of the sacraments coming to us from the Council of, I believe it's the Council of Florence, signed by Eugene IV. I could be wrong, but I believe it's a council in the Middle Ages. It's in the book. The new Mass cannot be the true Mass. They define that the essentials of these sacraments come to us from Christ and the apostles. And Pius X and many other popes said the Church and the popes have no power whatsoever over the forms of the sacraments in essentials. Paul VI took the consecration of bishops in 1969 and invalidated it by taking out every word except and replacing it with the formula made up by an anti-pope in the 4th century. In case anybody's missing what's happening, he said, I'm doing it from Hippolytus in the 4th century, who made up this formula when he was an anti-pope. Furthermore, after many years of bishops in the Eastern Rite asking Pope Pius XII to define the essential words of the ordination of priests and consecration of bishops, Pius XII defined this ex cathedra in 1947. 1947, he didn't change anything. This formula had been around since the time of the apostles, but he has specified in what had grown to be a long rite the essential words, which are not that long, and say, may this priest receive the fullness of the priesthood, something like that. Paul VI took that and ripped every word out except and. Jerry Matitix said no pope could do this. It invalidated the sacrament, invalidated the bishops. That's why the bishops are so horrible today. They're in a counterfeit church of Vatican II. They're not Catholic bishops. We're looking at a counterfeit church, which has eclipsed the church. So that was the final smoking gun. And there's a lot of confusion on this. Michael Davies seemed to only talk about the extraordinary magisterium. He's followed in that by the remnant, Catholic Family News. I have friends there. I think very highly of them. But they're following the false information put out by Michael Davies and the Society of Pius X, which Davies was like their lay theologian. So it's the ordinary and universal magisterium that Vatican II and the practice in the parishes violated. No true pope could do the errors, impose the errors on the faithful that have been done by the Vatican II popes, Paul VI especially one. So that is, in a nutshell, my development. Now, the way that, so here's what a Catholic should think when they really get all this together in their head. Okay, if what's happened since Vatican II, and at Vatican II cannot be the Catholic Church, meaning, because if a true pope had signed Vatican II, there'd be no error in it. No true pope would ever put falsehoods in the Mass and impose it worldwide on the faithful. So, if these guys can't be popes, once you see the proof that they can't be, because they taught error while pretending to teach infallibly, so what has happened? Now, I have a little bit of a disagreement with some of the more intellectual in the movement of trying to restore the church, that they seem to feel that if they prove that we have a vacant chair, these are anti-popes in Vatican II, that they can then relax and maybe have a glass of wine and say we solved it. I don't think that's the case, and that's why I'm such a supporter of the investigation of the 1958 conclave and the election of Cardinal Siri, the purported election of Cardinal Siri. Gary Dufresne, who is a portrait artist, or at least in his past life was a portrait artist, he really began this in earnest in 1988. He had been looking for the true Pope since 1974. He at least had the sense to realize this can't be right. Where's the true Pope? One Basque Spanish lady at a convention they held in Houston, the Traditional Catholics of Houston, told him, she came from Spain, I believe, and said, you know, Siri is our man. Cardinal Siri is our man. He's the one we should have as Pope. I don't think she was implying he was elected Pope. She was just saying he was our man, a conservative and Orthodox prelate. In '88, Gary saw an article by Hubert Remy of France. And the article was called, "The Pope, Could He Be Cardinal Siri?" The Pope, colon, again, punctuation, the Pope, could he be Cardinal Siri? That article is linked on whitesmoke1958.com, which is my website about all this. That's whitesmoke1958.com. And Hubert Remy, a reporter from France, and the Marquis de Francray went to visit Siri. And they asked him, talked to him a while, asked him a bunch of questions, and then they asked him, is it true that you were elected Pope in 1958, and even in the conclave since then? Said Siri, quote, had a rictus of suffering, whatever a rictus is, I guess it's an expression of suffering, looked up to heaven and said, very serious things have taken place. I could write volumes, and he never answered the question. So at the end of the article, Remy said, we know not, you know, what the future holds, but we leave this grave witness for the theologians and historians to determine what has happened and so forth. So Gary said he didn't even need to read the article. When he saw the headline, he started his investigation, and then Gary has turned up, and people working with him, a virtual handful, tons of information pointing that Siri was elected. We still don't have courtroom proof that Siri was elected, and we don't know how they kept all the cardinals and Siri quiet, exactly how they kept them quiet in the decades following. But a lot of stuff has come out. Two State Department, if you look in the book, The Vatican Exposed by Paul L. Williams, you can see two documents that he says he found, State Department, declassified State Department and FBI documents that say Cardinal Siri was elected on October 26, 1958. And he took the name Gregory the 17th and then was forced off the chair. On October 26, 1958, and you can read a bunch of articles on this from Gary Dufresne and some other stuff on whitesmoke1958.com. White smoke at 5 till 6 came up from 5 minutes from the Vatican. And the Vatican radio announced for a half hour, we have a Pope. We have a Pope having this paper. 200,000 people gathered in the square. The Swiss Guard came out to meet the new Pope. Conclavists were waving handkerchiefs, according to newspapers, in the windows to the 200,000 people. Then suddenly somebody said, hold everything. Back in the conclave, back in the barracks, false alarm. Father Pellegrino, who was on Vatican radio, shortwave radio then, this is 1958, after announcing for 30 minutes that we had a Pope, he at some point then said, the impression of white smoke on 200,000 people cannot be erased. They are telling me a mistake has been made. That is not possible. The answer must lie elsewhere. He felt certainly what they were telling him was not true. You don't have 5 minutes of white smoke, which is priests pushing dry straw into a stove for 5 minutes. You don't have that by accident. To have that, you have to have a man elected Pope. He has to accept, because some people refuse, and he has to accept, take a name. By all accounts, Siri took the name Gregory the 17th, the white smoke went up. Then threats entered the conclave through the dumbwaiter. And the threats were, according to Malachi Martin, in his book Keys of This Blood, he implies they were nuclear threats that involved the very existence of the Vatican State. Get rid of this anti-communist, this choice of Pius XII, who leaned towards Siri to be his successor. Get rid of him. And while we don't know what happened, certain testimonies seem to imply that once that threat was read, Cardinal Tisserand, who was the manager or camerlengo of the conclave, called an 8-hour recess. And while this is not proven, the evidence points that in this period, people who Siri thought were his friends came to him and said, look, you're 52 years old. He was only 52. We got the Soviet Union threatening us. They're threatening to do massive persecutions behind the Iron Curtain. You'll have your time. Step aside and let us put in an old man so we got a few years to work for this. Don't put your own ambitions ahead of the church. This is what I believe is probably what happened. Because when they're doing this type of thing, those who are at the top of Freemasonry or the Illuminati or whatever we want to call it, Pope Pius IX called it Freemasonry, but this would be not the guys meeting at the lodge down the street that's having sandwiches and playing cards. We're talking about people at the very top of the world banking system and world darkness. So they always have people, your friends, come to you. If they can do it, they'll have your mother come to you. And I'm sure that's what they did with Siri. And he said at some point, not proven, but allegedly, he said, if you want somebody else, elect somebody else. And they went ahead. 2 days later, John the 23rd, Roncalli walked out on the balcony to the wild cheers of the world press. All the bought-off world press, so responsive to international banking powers. They were just delighted with John the 23rd. So, at that point, I believe that the world powers of darkness, there were 51 cardinals at that point, 2,300 bishops or so. I believe they had someone already placed in the house of every bishop, certainly of the cardinals. Siri was probably put under some kind of extreme duress, being guarded 24 hours a day. The Soviet embassy was right across from his headquarters in Genoa, where he was the Cardinal of Genoa. And I'm just shortening the idea, but the powers that be that wanted to take over the Vatican for centuries, and in 1940s, because Pius XII and the Church was opposing the move towards a world government, New World Order, world communist government, whatever you want to call it, both H.G. Wells and Alice Bailey both wrote, if the Catholic Church doesn't start to play ball, we're going to have to bomb the Vatican. They both wrote. So this idea was but the better thing would be to take over the Vatican. And this is what apparently happened in the 1958 conclave. And real quick, foray into history. A lot of people don't believe God would let an anti-pope take over the Vatican. When 1130 to 1138, that happened. A clever fellow named Pierre Leone had bribed, or kind of had financial favors being given to most of the cardinals. Well, 6 of the cardinals that knew this, and the Pope, who was dying, who knew this, went to a castle. The Pope changed the rules, which is within the Pope's prerogative, and said only you 6 are going to elect the next Pope. And they elected Gregory Paparici to be Innocent II when he died. That got out quickly, and Pierre Leone brought together the majority of the cardinals, and he elected himself 6 hours later or something like that. Well, he was using money to compromise people, and he had the support of all the major families of Rome, maybe 10 or 12 of them, except for 2. And then Innocent and his party fled Rome and went out into Europe. And Anacletus said, look, I had the majority of the cardinals, and so even the last 2 families gave in. So for 8 years, this anti-pope controlled Rome, while Innocent roamed in Europe. And St. Bernard of Clairvaux eventually left the monastery, came to his aid. And the German prince Lothar was convinced to come and surround the Vatican. Something happened then that is we haven't merited this type of help at this point yet in our generation. But Anacletus dropped dead in the middle of this thing, and St. Bernard led Pope Innocent into the Vatican and explained to everybody what had happened. And the people that had been supporting Anacletus kind of said, well, yeah, we really shouldn't have done this. This wasn't a very good deal. And they all pledged support to the true Pope. But for 8 years, Anacletus